Hello and a very warm welcome, in fact, well, a welcome generally to everybody joining us online for Henley and Partners Global Webcast on their recently launched 2024 Africa Wealth Report. My name's Juliette Foster, and it's a tremendous pleasure to introduce our panel of experts, and they certainly have their work cut out for them today, because they're going to help us unpack the wealthiest countries and cities in Africa and also provide their expert insights on such issues as economic mobility, the investment migration sector, and wealth management on the continent. It is a big job, so let's kick off by meeting our panel members. First up, Dominic Volek is Group Head of Private Clients at Henley and Partners. Dominic, it's good to see you. How are you?
Very well, thanks, Juliette, and happy to be here.
Thank you so much for that. Let's now meet Amanda Smit. Amanda is the Managing Partner for South Africa at Henley and Partners. Welcome to you.
Thank you very much, Juliette.
Thank you. And Chidinma Okabalama is Senior Consultant Nigeria for Henley and Partners. It's very good to see you two, looking resplendent in red.
Hi, Juliette. Nice to be here.
Hi. Now, before I introduce our final panelist, is it okay for me to call you Chi? Because I think that's your favoured nickname. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, thanks.
Fantastic. And let's meet the final member of our panel, and that is Berry Everett. Berry is the Group CEO of Chas Everett International Property Group. Welcome to you. Berry, can you hear me? Oh, I think you have to unmute yourself. There you go.
It's a pleasure to meet you, Juliette, and to be with the panelists. It's great. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, look, it's great to see all of you, and we appreciate the fact that you've taken the time out to be with us today. Now, what we're going to do is start with Dominic, because Dominic is going to give us a short but very detailed overview of the key takeouts from the 2024 Africa Wealth Report, which I referenced earlier. Just to put that report in context, it is the definitive guide to Africa's wealth and luxury sector. So, Dominic, the floor is now yours, and you have 5 minutes. 5 minutes.
Thanks, Juliette. So, yeah, very, very pleased to have launched the Africa Wealth Report for 2024. This is a report that we put out in partnership with New World Wealth, which is a wealth intelligence firm that tracks the populations and movements or migration of millionaires around the world. So we look at different classifications of wealth, or at least private wealth, in terms of millionaires and centimillionaires and billionaires. We put out the report because we believe strongly that a good measure of the sort of financial health of a country is looking at private wealth as opposed to GDP. So GDP often is quite a static measure, and doesn't really shift much on a year-by-year basis. And so we think analyzing private wealth numbers and private wealth movements, between countries is a better or a more interesting statistic to look at. The key takeaways from the Africa Wealth Report this year, we see on the African continent total liquid investable wealth held by private individuals totaling now $2.5 trillion. And that is held amongst 135,200 millionaires on the continent. So millionaires being high net worth individuals or individuals with investable wealth of at least $1 million US. Africa holds a total of 342 centimillionaires. These are individuals with net investable wealth of at least $100 million. And there's currently a total of 21 billionaires that call the African continent home. We also analyze this further on a country by country basis. And as you can see, we have what we refer to as the African Big Five. South Africa still very much leading the way with, as you can see, more than double the number of high net worth individuals than second place Egypt. Interesting, if you look at the right-hand side of this slide, is the growth rates in millionaires. So the top three, South Africa, Egypt, and Nigeria, actually losing millionaire population over the last 10 years. And then we see the wealth creation hotspots in Kenya and Morocco, and especially Mauritius, that have seen pretty dramatic increases in their millionaire population over the last 10 years. We analyze that further into the cities themselves. So at a city level, you can see that Johannesburg still emerges as the wealthiest, with 12,300 millionaires, 25 centimillionaires, and 2 billionaires. This is now followed closer than ever by Cape Town, and we do estimate that by 2030, Cape Town will actually take over Johannesburg as, as the city on the African continent with the largest population of millionaires. And then, aligning to the previous slide, we see cities like Cairo, Nairobi, and Lagos also with, high populations of these cohorts of high net worth individuals, and so forth. If we look at most expensive cities, and here certainly Barry will talk to this, I think, in a bit more detail, but Cape Town, again, leading the way from a price per square meter in terms of prime properties. Grand Baye as well in Mauritius is right up there. We see Marrakesh in Morocco, Cairo in Egypt, but interesting to see that Morocco is featuring more and more in the space, and this is also one of the countries on the African continent where we expect to see significant growth in millionaires over the next 10 years. Africa as a continent is expected to see a 65% growth in its millionaire population over the next 10 years. And for sure, as we saw earlier on, in terms of the big five, there's countries like Nigeria and South Africa that see declining populations, but then there's a lot of other countries on the continent that are expected to see significant growth in the next decade. And then from a passport perspective, this is another index that we often talk about at Henley. And here we see how the African countries, or at least their passports, are ranking on the Henley Passport Index. The index effectively allocates a score to our passport for each, or at least a point to our passport for each destination that we have visa-free or visa on arrival access to. The story is not that great for most African countries. You can see the Seychelles and Mauritius are the top ranking passports on the continent with visa-free or visa on arrival access to over 150 countries. That's almost 70% of the number of destinations available around the world. But the rest of Africa ranks, not as well, particularly when you compare it against our peers in North America and Europe and some of the leading Asian nations like Singapore, Japan, and Korea. And of course, what does this mean? Well, if you're an international businessman or an investor, the ability to access markets globally and access opportunities and various other points is very critical. And so if you had born in a country that has a passport that doesn't really give you that travel ability or visa-free access globally, then of course, we have a lot of clients then that look at participating in one of the investment migration programs where you can acquire a second citizenship and passport that gives you greater travel freedom and therefore access to business and lifestyle opportunities. And then the last slide before I end off is really talking to something that plagues, I think, a lot of us that hold passports from an African country. I still have my South African passport, which can be a pain to get visas if I need to access the European Schengen and UK and these types of things. And one thing that we see is that African countries do see an abnormally high rejection rate of visa applications. And again, this just limits our ability to access global markets and global opportunities. And so this further, increases the demand for our services, particularly when it comes to citizenship by investment and acquiring an additional or second or third passport. But not all negative, of course. Africa is a continent with a significantly large and growing young population, high levels of urbanization. And so this means that, a lot of the cities, and particularly those where we see increasing millionaire populations, there's incredible opportunities as well, particularly for wealth creation. And so with these populations coming into the cities, there's a lot of demand for services and products, and we see a lot of high net worth individuals on the continent, but also outside the continent, that are investing back into Africa to capitalize on the business opportunities and in certain key sectors to make the most of what is a young and growing population. So I think that I'll probably leave it there. I know there's a lot of questions to get through with the panel, and I'll hand it back to you, Juliet. Thanks.
Thanks very much for that, Dominic. And can I say that that was a really interesting presentation you gave there. Good news story there for the African continent. But also as well, I'm going to throw out an invitation to our online audience. You've heard that report and the key takeaways, but we would like you to take part in this webcast. So if there are any questions or comments that you'd like to put to our panel of experts, you can do so using the Q&A function on Zoom, and we will try to get through as many of those questions as we can in the time available at the end of our discussion. And in fact, we're going to kick off that panel discussion now, starting first with you, Dominic, because look, there was so much that came out in that presentation. And I just reiterate my previous comment that it does actually paint a very optimistic future for the African continent. But in terms of the main findings, what we have actually seen is a private wealth growth forecast, which is quite good in some countries, but there's a decline in others. So what is actually driving that particular trend?
So as I said, Africa is a continent with significant wealth creation opportunities, but in terms of wealth preservation, arguably not as positive. If you look at, currency depreciation over the last 10 years, somewhere like South Africa, the rand has lost 43% against the dollar in the last 10 years. So, what does that mean? If I'm a high net worth individual and all my, the wealth I've created is sitting in rand, I've actually lost 43% against the dollar over the last decade. And so that's not great. And so we do see movements of individuals, but of course, movement of assets as well around globally in order to preserve that type of wealth. If we look at the stock markets as well, if you look at the JSE All Share Index, which holds, more than half of the, African listed company holdings, that has, although it's risen over the last 10 years in local currency terms, it's also gone down 5% in US dollar terms. And so there is this to Africa as your destination in terms of not only your domicile, but also where you hold your assets. And so we do see a lot more diversification of both of those elements. Number one, in terms of asset classes and investing into various geographies globally, but as well as across different asset classes. But more importantly, and where we see a lot of demand now, is the diversification of your domicile and the ability to actually have, golden visa in the UAE, or a golden visa in Portugal or Spain and Greece, and a Caribbean citizenship. Because if you are one of these particularly centimillionaire billionaires, you'll never restrict yourself to one jurisdiction. So the only way to hedge against what is a volatile world for everyone, regardless of your home country or nationality, is to diversify your domicile in terms of jurisdictions that I can access for my family, whether it's short term or medium or long term.
And so it does make economic sense. But Amanda, let me turn to you now. What I'm going to do is go through some numbers. There is a question at the end, but look, there has been a significant increase in interest in residence and citizenship by investment in Africa's wealthiest country, which of course is South Africa. This is something which Henley Partners has seen. It was reflected in that report. Now, just getting on to the numbers, we saw inquiries rising by 43% last year. So that's quite staggering compared to previous years. Putting it in context, it means that South Africans are in the top 10 nationalities globally in terms of applications for and inquiries about investment migration programs. Again, more numbers, it ranked 7th and 8th respectively, if you actually use those two metrics. So my question to you is, what are the reasons for this? And why has there been such an increase for South Africans? Because yes, we know that you've got the currency fluctuations of which nobody has any controls, but beyond that, what's the story behind that particular dynamic?
Yes, Julia, there are obviously many local reasons why South Africans are looking to really diversify their wealth and mitigate their risks. And those local reasons really include, governmental concerns, economic concerns. South Africa is suffering from a major energy crisis at the moment. But more than that, really, it is because of the weakness of the South African passport. So South Africans are really first and foremost looking to enhance their global mobility. And of course, through investment migration programs, they are able to obtain residency citizenship that does give them much more mobility. And that also enables them to, of course, expand their businesses and tap into new markets. But very interestingly, though, is that the majority of our South African clients are not looking to leave South Africa, but more to create and secure that plan B, to enable them to plan better for world-class education and healthcare opportunities for their families and for their children. And so those are definitely the major top reasons why we've seen such a dramatic increase from our South African clients.
Yeah, and thank you as well for stressing the importance of nation loyalty, because this is what this is all about, that people are actually trying to diversify, but they are still loyal to their country. Chi, come into the conversation. This is a two-in-one question, so let me deal with the first part. Again, from your perspective, how does the strength of passports across Africa for countries like Nigeria and, of course, South Africa affect access to global GDP?
Thank you, Juliet, for that question. And I'll just go off the back of what John and Amanda have said. So basically, even though South Africa has one of the highest visa-free travel rates compared to the other African countries, they only have access to about 17% of the GDP. So because the passport does not allow them to go out, it's still difficult when you're trying to do business outside of the country and the continent. And it's even worse for Nigeria. Passport is we have access to 45 countries visa-free, and we have only access to 1.5 of the GDP. So we're really working hard here, to be able to even make a dent, in global prosperity and prosperity for the continent, et cetera. So getting these passports just help us to do business better, because policies, being able to even travel for meetings, etc. So I think being able to have a plan B is very important, and we see it more and more now. As the currency is devaluated, we see it more and more now, as the ability to just have business overseas and being able to have your money in other currencies. So I think that the strength of your passport definitely affects how much access and how much global power you have, as a businessman and a businesswoman.
So given those challenges, which programs are particularly popular among Nigerian investors? What are you seeing?
So what we're seeing here is that the immediate need is to be able to travel. So a Caribbean passport does that for you. In little time, more than the other programs like the residency programs. So Antigua is very popular. Also Grenada is also very popular. But we are also seeing, like Amanda said, education-wise, we're seeing a lot of Nigerians looking further ahead for their children. So there's a lot of inquiries in Portugal residency, because then that gives them access to the EU for their children to go to school. So, but the first need is to have a passport that allows you to just travel and to be able to meet your meetings, to be able to help you to interact, go for conferences, etc. And at the end of the day, you come back home, because it is home. Nigeria is home. Yeah.
Okay. Stay with me on this, Chi, because look, does acquiring an alternate citizenship reduce the growth potential of the Nigerian economy? I mean, the reason why I ask this is because it does appear to be promoting migration out of Nigeria, the argument being that you actually need to keep the money there so that it runs its way through the economy and feeds the growth. You're taking it outside.
That's a great question. I know there was a time that, especially Henley Partners, we were this thing called JAPA, Japa syndrome. I don't know if you guys have heard of it. So this is literally leaving Nigeria for a better life. But that's not what we're about at Henley. We're not promoting migration out of your country. We're just promoting enhancing your global mobility, because that actually helps you to do more. So our clients don't typically leave Nigeria. They just get a passport and they're able to access the world, create more jobs because they have more opportunities. They have a lot of opportunities to do JVs, bring the jobs back into Nigeria, create more employment, etc. So I don't think that I would say we support that whole migration and Japa effect. What we do is we enhance your lifestyle, we enhance your portfolio, we enhance everything so that you can then bring the jobs back into the country.
So again, it comes back to that point, nation loyalty. So I get that. And thank you so much for answering that question, G. Amanda, let me take it back to you, because we just heard about the programs which are popular with Nigerians. What about South African investors? Which programs do they tend to favour?
So Juliet, I think in a sense, it's quite similar to what she explained. But for South Africans, definitely the number one top program has always really been the Portugal Golden Residency Permit program. And there are various reasons for that. I mean, there's that great tie in terms of creating a footprint in Europe, but also provides visa-free travel in the Schengen area. And most of all, it does have a pathway in terms of giving you the ability to apply for citizenship after only 5 years, which in essence really mean that the applicant have the ability to obtain European Union citizenship, and that really creates a lot more benefits and enhancements for various reasons, whether it's education or job opportunities. And then second to that, also in Europe is the Spanish golden visa program, Greece as well. And also similar to Chi's market, within the South African market, the Caribbean programs are very, very popular, especially through Antigua and Barbuda. We've also seen a number of applications for applicants applying for the UK Innovation Founder Program, which absolutely enables them and their families to live, work and study in the United Kingdom. And then also in Australia through the Golden Talent Independent Program. And Australia has always been one of the top immigration countries for South Africans to consider.
Okay, you mentioned there the Caribbean. I am going to return to that point in a few moments, but I'm going to break away from the conversation very, very briefly to remind our online audience that we want you to be part of the conversation. So a gentle reminder to use the Q&A facility on Zoom if you want to feed through any questions or comments to our panel, and I'm sure they'll be delighted to handle them at the end of this discussion. Some of you have been doing that already, so many, many thanks. Let me take it back to you, Amanda and Dominic, because look, Amanda, a few moments ago, you mentioned there the Caribbean. My question to both of you is, what makes the Caribbean CBI options so popular? I think I can guess, because the Caribbean has come up in our previous conversations, particularly with American investors, but I'd like to get your take, Amanda, and then yours, Dominic.
Yes, Juliet. So first and foremost, it really is because the Caribbean countries all have very strong passports that allow visa-free travel to the United Kingdom, all of the Schengen countries, and also many more. So on average, they all have visa-free access to approximately 150 countries. So that's reason number one. Reason number two, it's a very relatively short application process, whereby from start to obtaining your citizenship, it's approximately 6 to 9 months. It's also a straight to citizenship application, meaning that there's no residency period. There's absolutely no or very minimal stay requirements in the country. And then also the investment threshold in comparison to the European countries are much lower. And many of the Caribbean countries also enable family members to be included in an application, even siblings. So that makes it extremely popular. And in addition to that, if you know the dynamics of the South African market, so we see a lot of South African young people leaving the country, whether it's temporarily or long-term, but they get jobs overseas, and very often they tend to stay there and they set up families with the parents still being left or running their business in South Africa. So for them, it makes absolute sense to acquire an additional passport to give them that ability to visit their family members, not just when they want to, but also when they needed to. So that makes the Caribbean programs extremely popular in our market.
So flexibility is the key word here, Dominic. Again, does that tally with your experience?
Yeah, certainly. So for many years, the travel ability and the global access that, you know, holding citizenship of one of these Caribbean islands has been the attraction, but we have also seen that evolve, and that is still very much the main driver. But we have seen, you know, the attraction of the Caribbean evolve a bit as well, even since COVID. So, you know, the idea that I have the ability to go and sit and settle on an island during a pandemic scenario, which can close the borders very quickly and roll out a vaccine in much quicker time than perhaps my home country in Africa, has also become an attraction. And we do also have clients that are born in certain jurisdictions and have a passport from that country, just unable to get visas. And so we saw the slide on the rejection rate of visas earlier, but we have numerous cases where, you know, some of our clients have obtained a second citizenship in the Caribbean, and the process of getting a 10-year US visa or a Schengen visa has actually proven a lot easier with those passports as opposed to the passport that they were born with. So the Caribbean continues to be very attractive. It is probably worth mentioning, you know, Amanda alluded to the fact that from a cost competitiveness perspective, that the Caribbean is very good, you know, starting at about $100,000 US. I was at an industry event in Dubai last week and met with a number of the heads of the citizenship by investment units in the Caribbean. And 4 out of those 5 islands have now signed a memorandum of agreement that they'll actually be increasing the minimum investment levels, in fact doubling them by the end of June. So, you know, there is a limited window at the moment as well, that, you know, these prices that they're currently sitting at in terms of the investments required will actually go up to 200 in a couple months' time. So there is a bit of a window of opportunity still to benefit from the current investment levels.
I'm sure that on the strength of that, quite a few people will actually be squeezing into that window before things change. But Barry, I'm conscious of the fact that you have been out of the conversation, so I'm now going to bring you in, and thank you so much for your patience. But look, you wrote an essay for the 2024 Africa Wealth Report. And in the document, you've described African cities as the rising stars of global luxury real estate. You're an expert in this sector. So why is that? Why is the star rising? It seems to be on this unstoppable trajectory.
Well, mostly because Africa has such a big number of young people. I think that's critical to understand. And those young people are urbanizing at a rapid pace. And in doing so, they're creating opportunities for homegrown entrepreneurship. We're seeing very, very quickly people can find opportunities to, as we heard Dominique say, provide those services for that population. And we're seeing millionaires coming out of that sector. And ultimately they'll turn to billionaires, because this is a young group of people, and they're going to be around for many years, and thus the buyers and owners of luxury property. So the rate of growth in demand for luxury homes in cities like Lagos, Nairobi, Kigali, and Johannesburg, and obviously Cape Town, is already greater than in the older, more traditional centers of wealth. You know, in addition, many African countries are working really hard now on policies and incentives to attract more foreign millionaires as residents and investors in the companies and projects that they specialize in. I think a shining example of this is Mauritius. I mean, if we look at Mauritius, which has experienced a growth of high net worth residents of more than, I think it's 69% over the last 10 years, is a fine example of what I've established. And even when we look at our own personal experiences and the international platforms that we market on, and I'll get to that a little later, we're seeing a lot of interest from abroad because of the affordability, the lifestyle, which is just unmatched really, particularly when you take the Western Cape and some of the North Coast, etc.
And that is so interesting as well, the power of youth. And again, it's something which you alluded to, Dominic, in your presentation. In fact, Dominic, many experts such as yourself do talk about the wealth creation opportunities in Africa. Really important to stress this. So what role within that context does investment migration play in terms of supporting that dynamic?
I would say a critical role. Investment migration, so far we've the discussions we've had up until now have very much focused on the demand side in terms of these millionaires looking to participate in the programs that are already available around the world. But on the supply side, this is governments that look to actually, design and implement the programs themselves. So this is an area that we also assist with, and we advise a number of governments around the world and more now in Africa itself on how to actually create these investment migration programs, how to design and implement them, how to make sure that the due diligence on individuals, participating in them is at the right level, that the investments that are made are not creating housing bubbles, that are actually targeted at strategic projects within the country. And this is, of course, a very innovative way that forward-thinking governments can, really look to attract foreign direct investment, if it's into real estate or into businesses and that type of thing, or job creation, but also talent and skills as well. So we see a lot of talent programs being created around the world. Australia and the UK have very successful ones. And I think this is an area that Africa will continue to push now to develop more and more, probably initially residence by investment before we see a lot of citizenship by investment. But I think this will come soon.
Barry, we know that there's also a significant semigration of South African high net worth individuals from abroad and from other parts of the country into Cape Town. This has been happening over the past few years, so you've been keeping your finger on the pulse on that one. But what it has done is that it's led to a huge rise in Cape Town prime property services. Now, some skeptics would say, look, you can have growth, it can only go so far, but then it explodes. That's what bubbles tend to do. But I mean, do you expect that growth to continue? And if so, at what rate could we be looking at?
So if we have a look at the semigration, I believe it will continue. But because Cape Town's prime property prices are now so much higher than in other areas, I think we're going to see that people are going to hold on a little bit who own property there. Many South Africans who want to live in the Western Cape are also looking further afield. So give you an example, if we look at Hermanus or the Winelands, I think it came up on the list around Val de Vie, Paarl, Franschhoek, those kind of areas, the Whale Coast, for example, which is like Hermanus and that portion of the coast. And then if you go down from the Southern Cape down to Swellendam, which is more non-metro type of environments, and then George, the beautiful garden route, and down to Plettenberg Bay, which we saw was one of the highest priced areas on the garden route. So, but of course, I think Cape Town in itself will be hugely popular with affluent foreign buyers because of the exceptional beauty and lifestyle. But let's just take the geographics. There's Table Mountain and there's the ocean. There's no more space in between. So it's a little bit like a Monte Carlo. There's no place that you can't grow. There's no more land to be developed, so density is probably the next portion. But it's got exceptional beauty, and there's just no comparison when you compare what you can buy in Cape Town, for example, $1 million, compared to London, New York, even Sydney or San Francisco. So, that we've realized, and we use a lot of international platforms to get to high net worth individuals and to market to these extremely interesting people. And we found that our inquiries, we obtaining about 49 real people inquiries, about $343 million worth of inquiries on our properties at that level from international buyers. And I'm talking the top echelon CEOs of some of the well-known brands that we know, and obviously confidentiality is everything. So that's driving the prices. So who knows how far it's going to go. But I think we also want to show this value, which is also available in other parts of South Africa. So to become even more evident and well-known, which is why we've approached and launched our new luxury platform, Chaz Everett Luxury. We launched it last week. Talks to all these high net worth plateaus, Mansion and Global, Country Life. It talks to all those international platforms, James Edition, Luxury Portfolio International. And through our affiliation and our membership with leading real estate companies of the world, I've got friends who run real estate, some of the best real estate companies in more than 76 countries around the world. So, the global village has really become a global village, and the world of the internet connects us. And high net worth individuals want to own property in multiple countries. For example, we just had one of our clients, he sold the biggest quantity surveying business in Europe recently. And his home office has said South Africa, Cape Town is a place where he must buy at least one of those properties. So Portugal's another one, Spain, these are residences that sometimes they may visit twice in 5 years. But it's something that they work on. And I think when it comes to Cape Town, that's definitely something that's very, very attractive. But we've seen the same happening now in the North Coast, and you'll know recently Ernie Els has just signed an agreement to do another Simbali Lakes on the North Coast. That's $10 billion. That's a big development in South African terms. So we're excited about the future, and money moves. Doesn't stay in one place, as you certainly will know.
Absolutely. Well, I do have another question to put to you again on the property theme, but also just a heads up, I know, because Dominic will have to leave us very, very soon, in a few moments, in fact. So if you suddenly see him disappearing off the screen, he does have another appointment. But Dominic, thank you nonetheless, because it's been a great contribution that you have given to this webcast. But just to close out on the final question, in fact, to you, Barry, because look, I want to look at Johannesburg. What about the luxury market there? Because clearly it's facing some pretty strong competition from Cape Town. Do you see Johannesburg actually making a comeback over the next few years? And if so, how do you see that unfolding?
Well, even with the infrastructure problems that we have seen in Johannesburg, it's undoubtedly the financial heart of South Africa. So nobody can deny that. And frankly, where the most business leaders find they have to have a home there. You've got offices there, you've got to have a home there. And if it's going to be a home, it's going to be a home that fits in one of the high security areas like Stay City, or around, Dainfern, or one of the resorts estates around Johannesburg, and then even the traditional areas of Westcliff, Houghton, Sandhurst, for example. Why I say this is such an important factor and why it's going to make such a good return is because the prices in those areas have really become really much lower than what those properties are worth, and we've seen that turnaround this year. The last 3 months, I mean, we've increased our value of transactions above $1.5 million in those areas substantially, to locals and also people from North and West Africa who are looking for opportunities to educate their children and want to run businesses across South Africa. So I also think the return to work issues that many of the big corporates have started implementing have caused a lot of the people that have moved to Cape Town and living in Franschhoek and working online to come back for a couple of days to the office, and it's not working so well that leaving the family behind and traveling back five days later. And I think that's a bit of a challenge, and even in our group I see it with some of our top executives in our bigger group. At the same time, I think the geosocial uncertainties in other parts of the world, and are prompting many wealthy expats to return to South Africa, We've seen droves and droves. I can't call it an absolute trend, but we are starting to see that moving more and more. And people whose homes we sold 7, 8 years ago, a lot of those people coming back. So, you know, and I think the grass is always greener on the other side. And I think, as we heard from Amanda and Dominique, many people do this when they have young families. You know, they do it for their young families, and as the families grow, I've got a daughter who's moved to Portugal. She lives in Lisbon. She's building a business in Lisbon. I support her 100%. And she says, Dad, I want to get an EU passport and I want to learn to speak Portuguese. And so yeah, everything that I've heard today is true. And it's absolutely beautiful to have the opportunity for, if you're blessed enough to be able to have opportunities to set up global opportunities for our families elsewhere. Just means that with the technology, you know, we can tattoo each other just as often as we probably did when they lived around the corner. We just can't have that local bra that we used to on the Sunday.
Yeah, it's called the beauty of Zoom, or whatever your chosen platform happens to be. Barry, thank you so much for closing us out on that really fascinating note there. In fact,
can I add one thing?
One other thing, please. Go for it. Go for it.
Yeah. I think on top of that, since the conclusion of the African Continent Free Trade Agreement, we have been noticing an increase in the number of foreign millionaires setting themselves up in Johannesburg as well as a base for their new ventures into Africa. And I think we'll see that growing.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much for that, Barry. And Dominic, I know that there's something you want to say, and thank you so much for actually making the time just to be here, because I know that you're under pressure, but please do go for it. Say what you have to say. Go for it.
Thanks, Juliet. Yeah, I just wanted to add on to some of the points that Barry had made there. You know, he spoke about South African expats returning, but of course, it's not only South Africans coming back, right? We see, and Juliet, you mentioned, you know, geopolitical events and everything happening. And so while globally, we've always had a lot of demand from Asia and Africa and the Middle East into Europe, you know, Europe now, if you look at the sort of Russia-Ukraine conflict, we also see a lot of Europeans saying, well, what's my plan B outside of Europe, right? So the Germans look at Namibia and the French look at Mauritius. So there is also a lot of, you know, inbound as well. Although if we look at the African continent, it's seen a net outflow of 18,700 millionaires over the last decade. You know, there is still inflows and outflows. So that's a net number. And within Africa itself, there's about 1,600 millionaires that have moved, you know, within the continent. A lot of that has come down into South Africa from sort of central Western Africa. And there's clearly a lot of South Africans that also moved to Mauritius. But places like Namibia particularly are very much on the up. And then the other point I wanted to just touch on, because Barry was speaking about, you know, these high net worth individuals that they're assisting to acquire properties globally, because this is how, you know, this cohort of individuals think, is they're doing that a lot cleverly now. So now, instead of just having a portfolio of properties, if they do it strategically and they spend $500,000 on an apartment in Dubai, they get a 10-year golden visa. If they spend $375,000 in Mauritius, they get residence in Mauritius. And if they buy a villa in Spain for 500,000 euros, they get residence in Europe. And so this, I guess, is the real key. And this is how, you know, these high net worth individuals think, is yes, it's about diversification. Yes, it's about building a portfolio, but doing that with residence and citizenship by investment as the sort of almost value add onto the investment that I'm already making around the world. So this is, you know, a strategy that we're, you know, working very closely with our clients.
And it is a fascinating strategy. And Dominic, thank you so much for actually tying all the threads together to present us with that observation. And in fact, panel, I'd like to thank you all, in fact, for a really fascinating and lively conversation. It really has been very, very good. But it's now that point in proceedings when we take questions from our webcast audience. So Dominic, just very, very briefly, can you stay with us, or are we going to leave you? Or are you going to leave us, I should say?
So I'm sitting in Mumbai, so I'm actually on a strange time zone where my top of the hour is only in 15 minutes. So I can stay until the end, because I'm on Mumbai.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. But if there's any consolation, I'm also on a slightly odd time zone here as well. But look, a reminder as well to our online audience that if you have any questions or comments that you would like to put to the panel, please use that Q&A facility on Zoom. We would love to hear from you. And in fact, quite a few of you have been coming through already. So that's very, very good. And my question to the panel is, are you ready for questions from the audience? No response, I guess that you are. Okay, let's go for it. We've had this, well, let's start with the first one here, actually. And the individual who sent this through has actually said good day to all of us. That's great. Very interesting start. What is the best country to start a business if you are a South African? Mauritius is a popular option, but the barriers to enter is high. Who would like to tackle that one? I guess that it's your bailiwick, Dominic.
I mean, it's a pretty broad question, and I think very much depends on what sort of industries or sectors you're looking at, right? I mean, in certain countries in Africa present much more interesting opportunities if it's mining related or agriculture, or certainly some of the tech sectors around fintech and edutech and agri-tech. I think I probably couldn't give direct advice on a country to get involved in, but what I do know is that it would very much depend on what the business is and where you see the highest potential. If you look at the report, those, as we said, the whole purpose of the report is really to sort of gauge the financial health of a country, and we do this by looking at these private wealth numbers. I would think that big opportunities are always in those countries where you see increasing populations of high net worth individuals, because they're going to go where the business opportunities are. They're going to go where, from a fiscal and tax perspective, there's interesting incentives available, and of course from a lifestyle perspective. So that's probably one benchmark that I would look at. But again, it depends. Are you targeting those individuals, or if you are one of those individuals, we do forecast where the growth will be in the coming 10 years, and you can see that in the report. That, I guess, could be some sort of a guidance in terms of where to look.
Okay. Would anyone else like to add to that, or shall we move on to another question?
Juliet, I can maybe add to that, just in terms of the question. The person did indicate that the barriers to enter Mauritius is quite difficult, but in fact it's not. I mean, Mauritius really does have this amazing business environment for creating new businesses, and the investment threshold is also extremely low, with setting up a company in Mauritius by investing $50,000 does enable you to start a new business and at the same time obtain the right to reside on the island and bring your family members with you as well.
Okay, that's fantastic. Barry, would you like to add something too?
I'd like to ask a question, because I'm not an expert in all the golden visa issues, etc. But probably a question for Dominic and Amanda would be, in my view, from my experience and my travels, I think Dubai would probably be a great option. The population in Dubai is currently about 3 million people, probably about, of that, I think a portion of that, many of them are locals, UAE Emiratis. I do know that the Sheikh has wanted to double the intake of that population, and they're currently only building 40,000 units complete per year, which gives 400,000. And if you multiply that in 10 years, that'll take it up to 400,000. So there's still going to be a complete shortfall of property for the amount of people that they want to bring in. And if you just see the amount of wealth that's in Dubai, and how much money is flowing in there, because their ability to embrace business and make it easy to do business globally, it gives you quite a lot of options in terms of what business you're in. And I think, although Mauritius has that opportunity and is a great place also to set up and do business, I think it's slightly limited in terms of the opportunities that you will have. And to Dominic's point, it all depends on what kind of business you have and how you can tolerate the heat.
Yeah, and it's the UAE at large, right? If you look at the other Emirates in Ras Al Khaimah and Abu Dhabi, they all have really interesting initiatives. They all now offer 10-year golden visas. They're targeting, again, not only investment, which is around 2 million dirhams into property, but also talents and skills. They're approaching highly academically gifted kids in schools and offering the family golden visas to stay there and build businesses and make their careers there. Dubai as well, at least for myself, I'm based there now and I have a very global role, spending my time anywhere from, LA to Hong Kong and Zurich down to Cape Town. It is at the crossroads of the entire world, right? From a time zone perspective, if you're running a business that's trying to have any type of global focus, Dubai is the place to be. They've just introduced corporate tax recently, but it's still, extremely competitive on a global scale. And it's very much becoming, the place to have some type of a footprint, whether it's an apartment or a villa, or a business or something, anything like that. This is now, the time to have some sort of a presence in Dubai, and it very much fits part of, these millionaire portfolios. So even in the US, we have a lot of clients out of the US, but they all want a Caribbean citizenship. They want a golden visa in Europe, and then they want something in the Middle East as well. So the Middle East is definitely an area where anyone should consider, looking to open a business or expand.
Can I just jump in on that point, in fact, and bring Chi into the conversation? Because you heard there Dominic talking about the value of the UAE, particularly that 10-year golden visa. Is that something that's resonating with the Nigerian clients that you're dealing with, that you're actually seeing a move into the UAE because of the potential? And again, if you're actually using the need to have a good family life and also build your businesses to increase your legacy, etc., the UAE is ticking the right boxes in that sense for your clients?
So yes, we have had a lot of inquiries to the UAE. And I know that at a point it was very popular. But I guess the trends right now are more in terms of for young families who want their children to be in school, legacy-wise, the UK, the EU, Schengen areas, America are more interesting in terms of schooling. So we see a lot of families that actually, if they want to move their children to schools, they're moving their children to schools to the EU and to the UK. But for a typical businessman, yes, Dubai is very popular for just a typical businessman.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Let's tackle some more questions from our audience. They're coming through thick and fast, so let's see how many we deal with. We've had one here which asks, thank you for the presentation. Well, we're pleased to help you there. Just wondering how the wealth is distributed. How much is held by politicians, private individuals, etc., and in which sectors is it invested per country? So who would like to tackle that one?
Yeah, I think that one's probably a bit more for New World Wealth, who provide the sort of baseline statistics. What I do know is that, on the report side, we don't necessarily profile the individuals themselves. So it's really just private, wealth held by private individuals. We talk about liquid investable wealth. So this is, cash holdings, stock market holdings, debt-free residential property. So we look at the assets themselves in terms of, what the holding is, but not the profile of the individual. Obviously most of this is sitting with businessmen, but from a political perspective, I don't think we look at that level of detail.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Let's take another question here. They really are coming through very quickly. I'm not sure if I'll be able to keep up, but let's see how we do. How has Kenya come up with so many dollar millionaires? Any particular pattern or common feature amongst the people doing well? So Kenya under the spotlight. Who would like to tackle that one?
I think one thing I can comment is it's already in the big five, as I referred to earlier, with a large population of millionaires. And I guess if you look at those top five next to Morocco, it is one with a growing population. So Kenya, of course, has a lot of business opportunities. There's a large Indian diaspora there as well that brings a lot of businesses with them. But it is one of those markets where we do anticipate significant continued growth in the millionaire population in the 10 years ahead.
Okay, we have another question here. Despite a noticeable growth in wealth over the last 10 years, do you have an estimation of the wealth which is leaving the continent every year?
So we look at the number of millionaires, or at least the net inflow and outflow of millionaires. We do this on a global scale. As I said earlier, leaving the continent, there's a net outflow of 18,700 millionaires. But in terms of the wealth they're taking, I mean, they don't necessarily take the wealth with them, but of course they do, probably already have assets offshore. But we don't quantify that value. We look more at the actual number of individuals that are coming and going, as opposed to the wealth that they hold.
Okay, another question here. What is the impact of political instability, energy problems, and reducing municipal services in South Africa going to be on wealth migration? So I'm going to throw that out. Amanda, would you like to tackle that one? Oh, sorry. Well, it's either or.
I'll start again. I'm not trying to steal the show, but maybe I'll begin. Amanda's sitting in Cape Town, so she probably can comment better than I can. But it plays a huge role, right? I mean, we talk about millionaires or high net worth individuals relocating. We've spoken a lot about the fact that it's for business opportunities, that it's for to become more tax efficient, whether it's as an individual or as their in terms of their corporate life. But the reality is relocation also happens to access a better lifestyle, right? And so get my kids into better education prospects, better access to healthcare, better transport systems, crime and security, and all of these things come into it. So as Amanda said at the start, the vast majority of all the clients we assist in a country like South Africa do not move, right? But they do want to at least have the option that if they needed to, for whatever reason, they can go. So it's really an insurance policy that they want in place. But there is a portion that, of course, do physically relocate once they get residence or citizenship in another country. And for sure, some of those factors mentioned in the question are the driving force for that as well.
Okay, Amanda, would you like to add to that at all?
I think Dominic's answer was absolutely spot on. What we have also seen, maybe just to mention that in addition, is according to the Africa Wealth Report, we've seen that approximately 20,000 millionaires have actually left South Africa during the past decade, but then we also see the growth projection. So it really will create that sort of a balance. And I have to absolutely echo what Dominic says, that the majority of clients are actually not looking to relocate immediately. So that is positive news for the country.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, Dominic, I think this one is specifically for you because it says the slides you showed earlier indicated substantial growth of millionaires in Mauritius. Are you able to gauge how much of this growth is on the back of growth in Mauritius compared to migration from the likes of South Africa? Is this driven by tax?
It is to a certain extent. We have the numbers. Unfortunately, I don't have them on hand, but this is part of the the analysis that we do with New World Wealth in terms of net inflows and outflows of various countries, and often we can see where those inflows are coming from and where the outflows are going to. But I think it's well known and quite well documented now that there is a significant flow from South Africa to Mauritius. There's a lot of people that have moved there for tax reasons, but also lifestyle reasons, where it's not a very long flight to get back to South Africa. Their businesses are still, up and running in South Africa. It's a much larger market in terms of, consumers and that type of thing, depending on what the business is. But if I can spend, the weekends or a week in Mauritius and then come into South Africa for business purposes, that is definitely a trend that we've seen. And Mauritius, of course, is very interesting, not only from a corporate tax perspective, but also from an income tax perspective. And they do have a very successful residence by investment program available there, and a number of other options to get residence in Mauritius in order to make that either home or call it your second home.
Okay, so before we tackle another question, is there anybody who would like to respond on the panel to what Dominic has said before I move on? No? Okay, that's fine. Let's take another question. You are all working incredibly hard because the questions are just flying through here. So well done, everybody. I admire your stamina. Now, I think that this next point is more of an observation, but it says, same understanding on the concept need of people migration towards safe, healthy, secure place and environment. So does migration on wealth or investment from most development or nation investors assist less developed countries? I think that's what it means. So I hope I haven't done the question a disservice there, but did it make sense to anybody? Should I repeat that question again, or the observation as it is? Yeah, I'm happy to do that.
I can
Can
make
I repeat it?
some.
Because I know that Berry wanted it repeated before you tackle that. Is that
Okay.
correct, Berry? Would you like me to read it again? Sure. Okay, then let's take it. As I said, I think it is an observation, but an observation which demands a comment. The same understanding on the concept or need of people migration towards safe, healthy, secure places and environment. I think it says here, so does migration on wealth or investment from most developed, well, it says here development, I assume developed nation or investors assist less developed countries. It's written here as development, but I guess what the nub of this is, look, you know, you've got this migration from very developed nations. So how's it going to help those countries which are on the rise, less developed states? So that is what I think is the translation. I'm sorry if I've done it a disservice there, but Dominic, I know that you wanted to answer it. Berry, would you like to respond? In fact, I'm going to throw it open to everybody.
Yes,
So who'd like to tackle it?
I certainly do believe it will benefit the developing countries, because the expertise that people bring to those developing countries can certainly help. It's also when they move to those countries, they consume the services. Give you an example. For example, Scandinavian clients of ours, many of them from Sweden and Denmark, they come to South Africa. They come here for the lifestyle during the summer. The reason they come here during the summer is for the lifestyle. When they go back to their own countries, they've saved 30% on what they would have spent during the winter on energy costs and food, etc. But in the meantime, they're spending their money in our markets, and that's creating opportunities for employment, etc. So in that way, it can certainly help. And these are people that are not the most affluent people from those particular countries. These are sort of, I would call this upper middle class people from those countries that work online, but they prefer to stay here during the summer. And when they go back, they've saved almost 30% because the currency differentiation and the costs of the services, and they've lived a much better life while being here. So that would be one of the reasons. And Dominic, maybe you could expand on some of the other reasons.
Yes, so I you know, people just become more and more globally mobile now, and so just because I potentially leave South Africa and go and live in Dubai, it doesn't mean I'm not going to return to South Africa eventually or reinvest back into South Africa. And I use South Africa as an example because that's where I'm from. So there's a huge, you know, there's a couple 100,000 South Africans that live in Dubai, and they have good careers, and they, you know, don't pay any income tax. But the vast majority of South Africans that I speak to in Dubai, their retirement plan is back into usually the Cape, but back to South Africa, some, you know, to Mauritius. And of course, they come with their wealth that they've generated over those years. They reinvest into real estate and other projects. They consume once they're living in the country, even if it's just for 6 months a year. So I think that's one element of it, about how these, although there is a migration, a lot of us leave, we get good experience and skills and increase our own talents, and we bring that back together with our wealth. And then the other point is governments themselves, right? So I mentioned earlier about how, you know, governments use investment migration to attract that foreign direct investment. And there's, you know, if you look at the most popular programs around the world, Portugal launched their program in 2012, you know, coming out of the global financial crisis. So these investment migration programs are used by countries that are potentially not at the economic level that they would like to be. And this is why we have a lot of conversations with a number of governments in Africa as well now, is that they're all looking at how do we create some sort of a residence or citizenship by investment program to bring in that capital and to benefit our citizens that are currently in the country.
Okay, fantastic. Again, would anybody else like to add to that, or should we take some more questions? They really are flowing. It's a torrent. We'll see how much of that torrent we can navigate. Okay.
Juliet, I am now. I'd wish everyone well. You can catch me on Business Day Television in about 10 minutes live. So I'll see you all again, and thanks so much.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Dominic. And of course, just a general call to our audience as well. If there are any specific questions that you want to put to Dominic, okay, you can send them via the Henley and Partners website. I'm sure that he'll be more than happy to tackle them. So, okay, panel, let's see what else is there, what else lies in store, in fact, because it is such a busy session. Okay, so thank you to the sender of that previous question. We have one here. Hi, I have an investment opportunity in Johannesburg for a real estate development worth $500 million. This project offers incredible returns through the creation of a luxury shopping mall and luxury apartments with members-only facilities. My challenge is how to effectively market this opportunity to investors who may not currently view South Africa as an attractive or low-risk investment destination. Any advice or strategies would be greatly appreciated. Well, I don't think you're going to have any difficulty getting the advice on that one. So, Perry and Amanda, over to you.
So I think the important thing is the feasibility and the returns needs to be a full due diligence done, and it has to be something that resonates with the investors. There are many people who are looking to put their money, particularly hard, like fiat currencies, into investments that are going to give them good returns. And we just got to make sure that you balance the risk, and it's done through the right channels, and you're able to put the money back in the hands where it came from without breaching any of the laws of the country. So you probably need a couple of experts. It's one that I can't answer unless I have a look at the individual project. But there will be opportunities, and if they're good returns, then there's always going to be somebody's willing to take the risk.
That sounds like an invitation. So I think it sounds to me as if it might be worth her while contacting you as well, because obviously this is your bailiwick. You understand it very well. And Amanda, can I get your response to that as well? Because again, this is not outside your experience, where people come to you with these eye-watering numbers on developments or general wealth.
If I can add to that, I mean, most of the time people would come to us with a suggestion in terms of real estate development when it's tied to a residency or a citizenship investment program. And of course, if the benefits of that particular program is attractive enough, then that would make a fantastic investment opportunity for any investor globally. So other than outside of the borders of residency and citizenship, that's really not my area of expertise.
But look, either which way, given the size of the investment, it's definitely worth having a conversation with Berry. And I would imagine as well, Amanda, and also Yuchi, that may well be that some of your clients might be interested in that. So again, it's worth having a conversation, I would suggest, with all three of our remaining guests on the panel. So look, thank you so much for that. Let's take on another question here. How about the portion of the South Africans who choose to stay in South Africa but transfer their wealth to other jurisdictions? What's the trend in South Africa with regard to the most common jurisdiction being chosen? Amanda, can you tackle that?
Yes, certainly, Juliet. So we have seen that the most popular golden residency permit .
I think we may be having technical problems, Amanda, because it seems as if your Zoom feed is frozen. So can I ask you to perhaps log in, log out again? Is that possible if you can hear me? But I'm not sure if the problem's at my end or if it's with you, because I can see my other guests. I suspect there may be an issue there with your Zoom feed. So can we try again? Can you hear me, Amanda? I'm not sure that you can, but the feed does appear to have frozen on that one, which is rather unfortunate. But Amanda will try to get back in again. Ah, there you are. Excellent. So sorry about that. There was a technical glitch, as we call it in the business. Would you like me to repeat the question again?
I don't know up until where you've heard, so maybe you can just give me an update.
Do you know what? I think it might be easier if we take it from the beginning. because I think that's when the gremlins started intruding. But the question itself, I'll just repeat it. How about the portion of the South Africans who choose to stay in South Africa, but transfer their wealth to other jurisdictions? What's the trend in South Africa with regard to the most common jurisdiction being chosen?
So within the investment migration industry, Portugal has definitely been the top destination for all the reasons that we've already discussed. But we also know that a lot of South Africans are diversifying a lot of their funds through structures in Mauritius, for sure. Other jurisdictions are Spain and Greece. Malta is also an extremely popular destination. And of course, many wealthy South Africans are diversifying their assets by investing into real estate into the United Kingdom.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Now, we've had quite a few questions here on Mauritius. I don't know whether the panel will feel happy tackling this, but look, I'm going to roll them all together, because we've got one here, for example, which again, it says, which industry do you suggest to launch a business in Dubai and Mauritius? I suspect that Dubai, we should be able to answer that one. Mauritius, I'm not even going to attempt it, but I mean, we'll tackle that. But also, we've got another question here about the islands with coastal erosion, such as Mauritius. So in other words, the environment. And also, what about corruption in Mauritius? So that's basically a rolling question. Which industries is it worth launching in Dubai or Mauritius? In terms of Mauritius, okay, you've got coastal erosion issues. So again, I guess the question is, doesn't that really temper your attitude towards investment? And also the question of corruption. So it's three things rolled into one. Who would feel brave enough to perhaps give a broad brush sweep in terms of the answer? Nobody by the looks of it. Amanda.
Yeah, no. Unfortunately, I'm in no position to answer any of those questions in a lot of detail. I'm not that familiar with all the political and economic landscape of Mauritius. Of course, there are definitely certain sectors within Mauritius that are very, very good. And I would suggest that any of those attendees, if they are interested, to get in touch with us, and we can delve into that a little bit more deeper, and also identify which of those industries the government of Mauritius are particularly supportive of. So we would be able to tackle that offline.
I think it's a very sound piece of advice, actually, because that also addresses the issue of political corruption and, of course, coastal erosion. These are not areas, I need to stress this, which are outside the experience of Henley and Partners. They are dealing with this every day. And the great thing about this business is that they have experts around the world who can handle these questions. So we've got a few more minutes. Let's see how much further we can get. Again, a broad brush sweep question. With the corruption concerns in Africa, it would help to know how much wealth is in the hands of politicians. The value added factor of this wealth is questionable. I mean, look, the reality is that it is one of those areas which we're not going to get away from. So look, Chi, can I start with you and then just move it around the panel just to get their response to that, please?
Just like Amanda said, I think this is not an area of expertise for us. The wealth in the hands of, like Dom said earlier, we are measuring, the report measures, liquid assets. So, and it's more of the individual, we're not looking at what they do in terms of if they're politicians or not. But I don't believe anybody on the billionaire list is a politician. These are private businessmen. So I'm not, I will just stay away from this one.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fair enough. But I think the key thing that I've taken away from that response is who your clients are, because we're talking about people who are self-made or they may have inherited wealth. But the point about it is that they have actually built up that wealth, and they're working with Henley and Partners to find ways of growing it, because part of that planning does involve legacy, that when the founder of the dynasty isn't around, you want to make sure that it's actually going to be continued, it's in safe hands as it passes down the family line. But again, I would urge anybody who has these concerns, do talk to Henley and Partners. They're not afraid to answer these questions. There are people on board who can tackle it, because I'm sure it's something which comes up in conversations.
Juliet,
on the back of what you're saying, a point to note is, when we do onboard clients, we screen for stuff. We screen for if there's any political exposure. We screen for if there's any political affiliation, because that really determines if you're onboardable or not. Because we're not just trying to give, there's some certain restrictions that we have in acquiring a second passport, and there's certain restrictions that the governments of these other countries look at as well. So it's not just a come one, come all. There are strict due diligences that we perform at different levels of the process. And if we feel like you're not, you don't have a clean record, etc., if your money is not verifiable, then there would be a lot of roadblocks. So we're not aiding and abetting people who are stealing money to come and just get second citizenships and then move out of the country. That's not what we're about.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for that clarification. Really important. And Barry, I would imagine this is something as well which is crucial to you in the conduct of your business, making sure that it is safe. Because look, we are talking about reputations. Reputations take a lifetime to build, and they can be undermined in a handful of moments.
Yes, absolutely. So as a real estate industry, we play a very important role to do the due diligence in terms of the financial intelligence behind the customer. So the know your customer process, the due diligence that she just mentioned now, is something that has to happen for each and every single client. And if it's a person of importance or a relative of a person of importance, that person gets reported to, as it is in South Africa, to the Financial Intelligence Center, and they take it from there. And we've got quite a strict process for a natural person, for example. So you can imagine how complicated it is for trusts and legal entities. But for a natural person, it's almost like a 17-page application, and every single person has to be identified, matched, where the money's coming from, etc. And that's one of the realities of the world we're in now, that the world's clamping down on this kind of black money that's flowing around the world, and I think it's quite positive. So I hope that rather than identify the number, there's proactive measures in place to make sure that that money can't really move anywhere.
Absolutely. Look, clearly the process is working. So thank you so much, Chi and Barry, for that. Really important, this whole issue about due diligence, something which I'm sure everybody will find very reassuring. I'm going to close out with another question. These questions are just coming through thick and fast. But look, it says here, from your wider reading, are high net worth individuals properly serviced in terms of banking services and wealth management in the African continent? So I'm going to leave that one wide open. I'm sure that Chi and Amanda would like to tackle it.
Okay, so let me get a crack on it. So again, wealth management and banking services are not in our area of service. But what we do know is that we work with a lot of intermediaries. We work with a lot of introducers who help our clients in the banking sectors and in the wealth management sectors. And, they advise them to speak to us because we can help with legacy planning, citizenship and residency planning, for the future, education as well, because we do have Henley Partners education. So we interact with a lot of the in-betweens between the HNIs and us that advise them to speak to us so that they can get advice on different areas that we provide services for. But for the direct banking services and the direct wealth management, we don't, that's not a part of our business.
Okay.
If I can maybe add to Chi's comment, and Barry, I think you will probably agree with me, with both of us being fellow South Africans, but one of the good things about South Africa particularly is that we are excellent in banking services. We've got some of the best banks in the world for South Africans, and I know I can say the same thing for East Africa as well. So definitely from that perspective, top-notch, world-class.
Okay, I can't say further than that's a great advert for the banking sector. Barry, would you like to add anything to that, or shall we squeeze in one final question?
Let's squeeze in a final question. I think Amanda, and she did exactly.
They've done a great job. It's a slightly tough question. I think I know what my answer to this is going to be. Could we have statistics on how much of the African wealth is first, second, third, etc. generation wealth? Now, I don't know how far back Henley and Partners digs into that. I mean, would you like to have a stab at that, Amanda? And perhaps, Chi, maybe you'd like to have a go too.
Yes, Juliet, the comment on that question really is that it would be an answer for New World Wealth. So, of course, what is quite important is that, the Africa Wealth Report really is published by Henley and Partners in partnership with New World Wealth, who does all the data and analysis. So I think that would be a very interesting question to pose to them. And unfortunately, I don't have the answer to that question at the moment.
Okay, then. I think that's where we're basically... Oh, please go for it. Go for it, Barry.
I would add that in South Africa, there's been over the last, since 1994, there's been a number of new wealth. People with our broad-based Black economic empowerment policies, there's been a lot of wealthy billionaires created that weren't wealthy prior to that time. So there's definitely been that. Many of them have educated their children. The children are growing new businesses independently now. So certainly we've seen a lot of new wealth created. And then there's also the second generations. And I think one thing about South Africa, particularly because we face so many challenges, we're able to innovate very, very quickly. I travel abroad, deal with Americans and Europeans often. And they're quite surprised with the innovation, the technology we build to solve issues, because certainly we don't want to pay the same kind of dollar prices for a piece of technology that we can build ourselves. So, those are the kind of things that come out of challenges when instead of sitting on the fence and worrying about the future, rather predict it yourself and create it. So I think South Africans are pretty good at doing that. I think the African continent, that's the opportunity I see for the African continent.
Fantastic. It's good to end things on an optimistic note, but there, sadly, we must leave it. Time, as ever, is the enemy. I'd like to thank the remaining members of our panel for their fantastic contribution to what has been an incredibly interesting and lively debate. Sadly, Dominic had to leave us, but Chi, Barry and Amanda, thank you so much for staying the course, and in your case, Amanda, actually battling the technical issues. We got there in the end, and thank you so much for all of you for that fantastic contribution, and also the fact that we were able to incorporate it with the recently published 2024 Africa Wealth Report. I'd also like to extend my thanks to you, our global online audience, for your contributions. Some super questions there. Thank you so much for staying the course with us. We appreciate your interest and, of course, your engagement. Keep safe until the next time.